Imagine opening your inbox and just sitting right there is a tax bill from a regulatory body.
Oh, the absolute nightmare scenario for any executive.
Right. And we're not talking about some minor, administrative fee or a slap on the wrist. This is a bill for millions of dollars aimed directly at your company's operating margin.
Just tearing right into the bottom line.
Exactly. But here is the absolute kicker. This massive financial penalty, it's based entirely on pollution, like on carbon emissions, that your supply chain never actually created.
Right. It's completely fictional. It only exists on paper.
It is entirely made up. So welcome to the multi-million-dollar trap of what we call phantom carbon.
Yeah. And it's just a brutal reality check for the modern C-suite right now. I mean, we are looking at a scenario where major enterprises are unintentionally inflating their reported carbon footprints by up to 40%.
40%, that's almost half. I know, it's staggering. They are literally volunteering to pay massive premiums on their compliance ledgers because the underlying data architecture they're relying on is it's fundamentally broken.
Which is exactly why today's deep dive is an exploration into this massive hidden financial leak within modern manufacturing and global supply chains.
It's such a critical topic.
It really is. We are going to unpack exactly how this phantom carbon gets generated through, lazy mathematical shortcuts, and more importantly, how an incredibly simple, low-tech data bridge.
The utility bill scan.
Yes, exactly. How this OCR utility bill scanning brig is literally rescuing these organizations from catastrophic regulatory exposure.
It's such an elegant fix.
It's beautiful in its simplicity. And to guide us, we're pulling insights from a really fantastic stack of research today. We've got Prasad Blunt's strategic writings on eliminating phantom carbon and the Scope 3 data bridge.
A really foundational piece of work, yeah. Definitely. Plus, we're looking at a super in-depth McKinsey report on Scope 3 targets in the materials value chain and Climatic's methodological breakdowns on spend-based versus activity-based carbon accounting.
Right, which sounds technical, but it's actually fascinating when you dig into it. But to really understand the failure of the math here, we first have to, establish the physical boundaries of what these companies are even being forced to measure.
Good point. Let's set the stage for everyone listening.
So the Greenhouse Gas Protocol breaks down corporate emissions into 3 scopes. Scopes 1 and 2 are honestly relatively straightforward, mostly because they occur within the 4 walls of the business.
Right. It's stuff you can see.
Exactly. So Scope 1 is just the direct burning of fossil fuels. Like,
yes,
if you are an enterprise and you own a fleet of delivery trucks.
The diesel exhaust coming out of those tailpipes, that's your Scope 1.
You got it. Or if you operate a glass manufacturing plant and you have these massive natural gas furnaces, the combustion emissions from those furnaces are Scope 1.
Because the company owns the asset. They buy the fuel, they burn it, they measure it. It's a direct operational reality.
Exactly. And then you move to Scope 2, which covers indirect emissions from purchased energy.
Like electricity.
Right. The classic example is the electricity drawn from the grid to power your corporate headquarters or your assembly lines. You aren't physically burning the coal or the natural gas yourself.
But the power plant 50 miles away is burning it specifically to generate the electricity you're demanding.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So Scopes 1 and 2 are highly visible. You just look at your own meters and your own utility bills.
But the real crisis, the phantom carbon trap we're exploring today, lives entirely in Scope 3.
The dreaded Scope 3.
Right. It is the upstream and downstream supply chain. It's this massive hidden iceberg. Like, if we think about a major heavy machinery manufacturer, their Scope 3 upstream includes the mining operations pulling iron ore out of the earth in Australia.
Which they don't own.
Exactly. It includes the mid-market foundries in the American Midwest, turning that ore into specialized steel components. It includes the whole logistics network of freight ships and long-haul trucking, moving those parts to the final assembly plant.
And that's just upstream. Downstream, it includes the emissions generated when the end customer actually operates that heavy machinery for 20 years, right down to the emissions required to eventually recycle the scrap metal at the end of the product's life.
It's everything. And for most modern enterprises, especially in manufacturing and heavy industry, Scope 3 is not just some minor footnote.
No, not at all.
It frequently accounts for, 70 to 90% of a company's total carbon footprint?
Easily, up to 90%.
Oh.
Which brings us to the immense regulatory pressure that is suddenly forcing executives to actually care about that 90%.
Because for a long time, let's be honest, Scope 3 reporting was basically an exercise in corporate public relations.
Oh, 100%. It was totally voluntary.
Right. You'd put a rough estimate in your annual sustainability report, add some nice stock photos of wind turbines, and call it a day.
But that era is definitively over.
It really is. The squeeze is on.
Yeah, the transition from voluntary PR to strict, legally binding financial compliance is being driven by global mandates. The biggest one right now is the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive.
A CSRD out of the European Union.
Right, and the CSRD is this massive legislative framework that basically elevates carbon reporting to the exact same level of rigor and legal liability as your traditional financial reporting.
Which is terrifying for an accounting department.
Oh, they're panicking. It requires comprehensive, auditable disclosures of Scope 3 emissions. And, this is not just a European problem.
Right, because of the global economy.
Exactly.
Yeah.
If you're a U.S.-based multinational, but you have significant revenue inside the EU, congratulations, you are caught in the CSRD net.
Plus, the SEC in the U.S. is actively pushing similar climate disclosure frameworks. But I think one of the most interesting points from the research is that it's not just government regulators tightening the screws here.
No. The capital markets are completely weaponizing this data.
Yes. Under Europe's Sustainable Finance Disclosure Regulation, the SFDR major institutional investors and fund managers are legally required to report the Scope 3 emissions of the companies sitting inside their investment portfolios.
Right, so that creates this vicious downstream effect. If a major enterprise cannot provide accurate, auditable Scope 3 data to their investors,
Those fund managers will eventually be forced to divest.
exactly, they will literally drop the enterprise from their portfolios to protect their own compliance status. Access to capital is now directly tethered to carbon data accuracy.
So put yourself in the shoes of the listener for a second. Imagine you're the chief sustainability officer, the CSO, at a Fortune 500 company.
Okay, my stress levels are already rising.
Right. The CEA comes down the hall and makes it crystal clear. The company needs its Scope 3 numbers finalized for the upcoming audit. Or you face regulatory fines and the potential loss of your biggest institutional investors.
No pressure.
None at all. The CSO holds the absolute liability for producing this data. But they face a structural nightmare, which is that they lack any operational control over the supply chain.
It's the ultimate catch-22. The CSO does not sign the purchase orders for raw materials. The procurement team handles that.
And procurement is historically incentivized entirely on cost reduction, right? Like quality control, delivery speed.
Exactly. Sustainability has rarely been a key performance indicator for a procurement officer. So the CSO is totally isolated.
So they try to map the supply chain. They might be able to squeeze some decent data out of their massive Tier 1 suppliers, right? The multi-billion-dollar partners who have their own massive ESG department.
Sure, the Apples and the Boeings of the world can give you data.
But the moment the CSO looks deeper into the Tier 2 and Tier 3 suppliers, they hit a total data blackout.
An absolute wall. Because think about the reality of a Tier 2 supplier. You are dealing with, like, a specialized chemical mixing facility with 80 employees in Ohio, or an independent packaging plant.
Right.
These are mid-market businesses operating on tight margins. They do not have dedicated sustainability teams. They are not tracking the exact carbon intensity of the specific batch of industrial solvent they sold to you last quarter.
So when the enterprise CSO sends them a 50-page ESG data request questionnaire,
It gets routed to a busy operations manager who takes one look at it, laughs, and deletes the email.
they just ignore it. So the CSO cannot force the mid-market supplier to comply, but they also can't leave the compliance audit blank. They are trapped.
And that is exactly where the phantom carbon is born. Because they're trapped, they default to what the industry calls spend-based accounting.
Okay, let's unpack this, because this is the core of the problem.
Right. Because they cannot track the physical reality of the supply chain, they track the money flowing through it. Spend-based accounting is this methodology born out of pure necessity, but it relies on macroeconomic estimates that were never, ever designed for micro-level corporate auditing.
So how does the math actually work? Walk us through it.
The mechanics are straightforward, but deeply flawed. The CSO takes the enterprise's financial ledger. They look at a specific category of procurement. Let's say your company spent $50 million on aluminum parts from various Tier 2 suppliers over the fiscal year.
Okay, $50 million in aluminum.
Right. The CSO takes that $50 million figure and literally just multiplies it by a generic industry-wide emissions factor.
And where are they getting these generic factors?
They're typically pulled from environmentally extended input-output models.
That is a mouthful.
It really is. EIO models for short.
Mhm.
A prominent example is XEO-base. And these databases They map the entire global economy by sector and region. They calculate the average carbon intensity of producing 1 unit of economic value in a specific industry.
So the EIO model might dictate that, on average, $1 of aluminum production in North America generates a specific fraction of a kilogram of CO2.
Exactly. The CSO multiplies their $50 million by that generic factor, and bam, the resulting number is entered onto the official compliance ledger as their Scope 3 aluminum footprint.
Okay, that's like trying to calculate my exact daily caloric intake by looking exclusively at my credit card bill from the grocery store.
There's actually a perfect analogy.
Right, like it assumes every dollar I spend equals a set, average amount of calories. It completely ignores the physical reality of what I actually put in my cart.
Yes.
I could spend $100 on cheap, mass-produced donuts, or I could spend that exact same $100 on expensive organic celery. The physical impact on my body is wildly different, but the spend-based model looks at the receipt, sees $100, and assigns the exact same caloric penalty to both.
It is a totally blind calculation. And when you apply that blind calculation to complex industrial supply chains, the errors just compound massively. This is where Prasad Bond's analysis is so critical. He points out that spend-based accounting consistently overestimates true physical emissions by up to 40%.
Up to 40% overestimate. And that gap, that 40% error, that is the phantom carbon.
Exactly. It represents thousands and thousands of tons of greenhouse gases that were never actually emitted into the atmosphere by the supply chain.
They exist nowhere in the physical world.
Nowhere. But because the crude math of the spend-based model dictated it, those fictional emissions are now permanently cemented onto the enterprise's official compliance ledger.
And this is why you, the listener, need to care, because this isn't just a rounding error on an internal spreadsheet that nobody looks at.
Far from it.
Enterprises will pay real, punitive regulatory taxes on this fictional 40% footprint. You are literally bleeding operating capital to pay a tax on pollution that never existed.
Right. If you are an executive dealing with regulatory frameworks that are beginning to price carbon, whether that's through direct carbon taxes or cap-and-trade systems or compliance penalties, you are now financially liable for that 40% inflation.
It's crazy.
Just do the math. If carbon is priced at $50 a ton and your spend-based model overestimates your footprint by 100,000 tons.
You just mathematically generated a $5 million liability out of thin air.
Exactly. It is a catastrophic, unforced error that degrades the enterprise's valuation.
So if spend-based accounting is this flawed and it's generating millions in fake tax liabilities, why on earth does everyone still use it?
Well, we have to look at the nuance Climate Act provides here because it explains the transition phase. The goal isn't actually to eradicate spend-based data overnight.
Wait, really? Even with the phantom carbon?
Yeah, because in certain contexts, it is a highly necessary triage tool. When a massive enterprise begins its carbon accounting journey, the sheer scale of the operation is paralyzing.
I guess that makes sense. An automotive manufacturer might have, 20,000 distinct suppliers scattered across 50 countries?
Easily. It is operationally impossible to collect physical primary energy data from 20,000 independent businesses in year one. You would drown in unstructured data before the first audit was even scheduled.
You'd need an army of accountants.
Right. So that is where spend-based screening proves its utility. You use the financial ledger as a high-level diagnostic tool. You run your entire global procurement spend through that EEIO database.
Because you already have pristine financial records in your ERP system, right? So the macro-level calculation is basically instant.
Exactly. It gives you a topographical map of your supply chain's estimated carbon intensity. It helps you find the hotspots.
Okay. So the screening might reveal that, say, 65% of your estimated emissions are localized just within your steel and aluminum procurement categories. While the millions of dollars you spend globally on, corporate catering or office supplies or landscaping services, that accounts for less than 1% of your footprint.
And Climatic makes the point that for that long tail of indirect, low-impact spend, it is perfectly acceptable to just continue using spend-based estimates indefinitely.
That makes sense. The administrative cost of tracking the exact physical carbon footprint of every single ream of printer paper or every catered lunch vastly outweighs the benefit.
Exactly. The margin of error on a $50 catering order is not going to trigger a regulatory audit or a massive carbon tax.
Right. But the danger is failing to graduate beyond spend-based data for the heavy hitters.
Yes. the high-impact raw materials and manufacturing inputs that make up the bulk of that footprint. When you apply financial proxies to critical materials, you completely shatter the incentive structures within the business.
Okay, give me an example of how that breaks down.
Let's consider the internal dynamics of a procurement department. Imagine a senior procurement officer spends months negotiating a massive contract with a Tier-2 steel foundry. Through sheer leverage and bulk purchasing, they secure a 20% discount on millions of tons of steel.
Financially, this is a massive win for the enterprise. They're popping champagne.
Right, but look at the mechanics of the carbon ledger. The spend-based model is hard-coded to multiply dollars spent by a generic factor. Because the procurement officer reduced the dollar spend by 20%, the model automatically calculates a 20% reduction in carbon emissions.
Oh, wow. So on paper, the enterprise looks significantly greener.
Yes, but in physical reality, absolutely nothing changed.
The foundry still burned the exact same tonnage of metallurgical coal to melt that steel.
Exactly. The exact same volume of CO2 was vented into the atmosphere. The enterprise is reporting a phantom reduction based purely on a financial negotiation.
That is so broken, and I imagine the inverse scenario is even worse for sustainability goals.
Oh, it's brutal. Imagine the enterprise decides to aggressively decarbonize its supply chain. They find an innovative supplier producing green steel using electric arc furnaces powered by renewable energy.
So the physical carbon intensity of this material is near zero.
Right. However, because the technology is nascent and demand is high, this green steel carries a significant market premium. It costs, say, 20% more than traditional highly polluting steel.
Okay, I see where this is going.
The enterprise does the right thing. They allocate the capital, pay the green premium, and physically eliminate thousands of tons of real emissions from their supply chain.
But when the invoice hits the spend-based accounting model?
The system registers a 20% increase in procurement spend, and the crude math dictates that more money spent equals more carbon emitted.
So the spend-based model artificially inflates their carbon footprint, literally penalizing them on their regulatory audit, precisely because they invested in sustainable materials.
Yes. It is a completely broken feedback loop that punishes environmental progress and rewards aggressive discounting of dirty materials.
Which perfectly summarizes why enterprises need a hybrid transition. Use the spend-based screening to find the biggest leaks, the hotspots like steel and logistics, but then they absolutely must transition to precise activity-based primary data for those heavy hitters.
They have to measure the physical truth.
Right. So let's talk about that physical truth. Activity-based data is basically the antidote to phantom carbon, right?
Exactly, because it ignores the financial ledger entirely and measures the physical reality of industrial operations. It looks at the exact liters of diesel fuel combusted in a generator, the precise cubic meters of natural gas burned in a furnace, or the exact kilowatt hours of electricity drawn from the local grid.
It's hard, undeniable physical truth.
Yes, but knowing that activity-based data is the only way to eliminate that 40% estimation penalty, we have to examine why it is so remarkably difficult to actually extract this data from the supply chain.
Right. If it was easy, everyone would just do it.
Exactly. Prasad Band's research isolates 3 distinct bottlenecks that trap this physical data at the supplier level, preventing it from ever reaching the enterprise.
Okay, let's break those down. What's the first bottleneck?
The first is the choke point owner. We touched on this with the Chief Sustainability Officer.
Right, the CSO has the liability.
But they sit in a corporate headquarters thousands of miles away from the physical factory floors of their suppliers. They possess all the regulatory risk, but zero operational authority to mandate how a Tier-2 foundry measures its energy consumption.
They can't just march in and demand a meter reading.
Exactly. The second hurdle is the technical bottleneck, which is really just a massive failure of systems integration.
How so?
Well, let's assume a progressive mid-market supplier actually wants to share their daily energy consumption data with the enterprise. How do they physically transmit it?
I mean, they'd have to put it into the enterprise's system somehow.
Right. But the enterprise is running a massive, highly secured enterprise resource planning system, a legacy SAP or Oracle architecture. Corporate IT departments are structurally designed to be paranoid.
Oh, totally. Their entire mandate is to protect the ERP from external breaches.
Exactly. They are not going to open up direct API gateways and allow thousands of unvetted mid-market suppliers to push raw, unstructured data directly into the corporate mainframe.
The security risk would be catastrophic.
And the data formatting would be a total nightmare. So even if the supplier has the data, the corporate firewall blocks it.
Which leads to the third bottleneck, right? The vendor bottleneck.
Yes, and this is perhaps the most intractable issue. Mid-market suppliers are experiencing profound ESG fatigue.
Oh, I bet.
From their perspective, the enterprise is demanding complex, hyper-granular environmental data reporting without offering any financial compensation for the administrative labor required to produce it.
Right. The enterprise isn't paying them more to do this math.
Exactly. The supplier views these data requests as an unpaid mandate that just distracts them from their core business, which is manufacturing goods.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting. Because when the modern tech industry, like Silicon Valley startups, when they look at a problem characterized by fragmented data, legacy IT systems, and regulatory compliance, their instinct is always to over-engineer a solution.
Always. Throw AI at it, throw hardware at it.
Right. They assume a problem of this magnitude requires deep algorithmic intervention. So they approach these enterprise CSOs with proposals to deploy sophisticated Internet of Things networks.
The IoT hardware fallacy.
Exactly. They want to ship crates of expensive IoT hardware sensors to these independent mid-market foundries, asking them to literally bolt these sensors onto their assembly lines and natural gas meters to monitor energy draw in real time.
Which is just a profound failure to understand the operational reality of the supply chain.
It's absurd. Are we seriously expecting a busy, independent mid-market steel foundry operating on tight margins to suddenly halt production, buy a bunch of expensive IoT sensors, and become a tech hub just so their corporate buyer can save money on a tax form?
It's completely misaligned.
It seems like a massive misalignment of incentives.
You are spot on. You cannot expect them to train their staff on complex, predictive AI dashboards for a corporate buyer sitting in another time zone. The supplier will resist, they'll delay, or they'll just outright refuse.
Which brings us back to Prasad Bande's analysis. He advocates for a return to first principles thinking here.
Yes. If you need primary, activity-based energy data from thousands of independent suppliers, the extraction mechanism must require absolutely zero behavioral change from the supplier.
Zero friction.
It must carry zero financial costs for them. It has to fit seamlessly into their existing operational rhythm.
And having established that high-tech hardware sensors will fail miserably because of that friction, we pivot to the surprisingly low-tech, highly elegant solution that actually works, the corrective strategy.
And it relies on a brilliant observation. The exact physical activity data the enterprise desperately needs. The specific kilowatt hours of electricity drawn and the therms of natural gas burned by the supplier. It already exists.
It's already there.
It is already being meticulously tracked, verified, and audited by a third party every single day.
The utility company.
Exactly. The data lives on the physical utility meter attached to the outside of the supplier's factory. And crucially, that highly accurate physical energy data is consolidated, formalized, and sent directly to the supplier's accounting department every single month.
In the form of a standard, boring PDF utility bill.
The humble utility invoice, it is the ultimate ground truth.
I love this so much. It is activity-based data, certified by the utility provider, sitting right there in the supplier's inbox.
Yes. The technological challenge isn't building a predictive AI or a global IoT hardware network. The challenge is just building an automated pipeline, capable of extracting the raw data from those varying PDF layouts and injecting it securely into the enterprise ERP.
So let's walk the listener through the exact steps to integrate this into an enterprise workflow, because this Scope 3 data bridge is brilliant.
It's a pipeline designed entirely around asymmetric effort.
Right. So the first phase is ingestion. And this is where the friction is completely eliminated for the supplier.
How so?
Well, the supplier is not required to log into a new enterprise portal. They don't install new software, no hardware. They simply take the standard monthly utility bill they are already receiving from their power company, a PDF they already have, and they forward that email to a secure automated drop zone managed by the data bridge provider.
It's an action the supplier's accounting clerk is already performing when they process the invoice for payment anyway.
Exactly. Forwarding the PDF requires zero new administrative overhead, no new behavior required.
And once that PDF hits the secure drop zone, we enter the extraction phase.
Which relies on optical character recognition, or OCR.
Right, but we have to be specific about how this technology actually functions today, because it's not just taking a dumb picture of the document anymore.
It's much smarter than that.
The OCR pipeline has to handle massive variability. A Tier-2 supply chain might span 1,000 different municipalities, meaning the system is ingesting 1,000 uniquely formatted utility bills from 1,000 different local power companies.
Like every bill looks different.
Exactly. So the OCR technology uses layout parsing and machine learning validation models to understand the architecture of the document.
I picture it like Dieter Rams style functional clarity, just a beam of light lifting raw numbers off a page.
That's a great way to visualize it. It isn't just reading text blindly. It identifies the specific bounding boxes that contain the vital metrics. It scans right past all the marketing material and the billing addresses and zeroes in on the raw activity data.
The actual 50,000 kilowatt hours consumed.
Right, the specific billing dates, the facility location, and extracts those precise figures, structuring what was previously totally unstructured data.
Okay, so now we have the raw energy units, but the third phase is conversion, because raw kilowatt hours are not audit-ready carbon emissions.
No, they are not.
So the data bridge uses basic logic here. It takes the extracted energy volume and cross-references the geographic location of the supplier's facility against established grid intensity databases.
Like the EPA's EGRI in the United States, or equivalent databases managed by the International Energy Agency globally.
Right, and this step is vital for accuracy, because if the OCR pipeline identifies that the supplier facility is located in a region where the electrical grid is heavily powered by, say, hydroelectric dams or wind farms.
Then the conversion logic applies a very low emission factor to those kilowatt hours.
Exactly. But if the facility is in a region heavily reliant on aging coal-fired power plants, the conversion logic applies a significantly higher emission factor.
The system automatically performs this location-specific calculation. It transforms the raw energy draw into a highly precise, geographically accurate carbon footprint.
Which brings us to the final phase, ERP integration. The primary truth, this verified carbon data, is pushed directly into the enterprise ERP system via an API bridge.
And this completely bypasses the technical bottleneck we talked about with corporate IT.
Because it standardizes the input. The corporate IT department doesn't have to worry about thousands of external suppliers trying to access their system. They only have to whitelist one highly secure, verified API connection from the data bridge provider.
The unstructured chaos of thousands of different utility bills is normalized and mapped directly into the precise fields required by the enterprise ERP. It's brilliant.
And it succeeds specifically because it is an asymmetric trade.
What do you mean by that?
The supplier experiences zero financial burden and zero operational friction. They just forward an email. And the enterprise avoids massive regulatory exposure.
Yes. The enterprise receives audit-grade, activity-based primary data that instantly overrides the flawed spend-based estimates. The 40% phantom carbon penalty is just eradicated from the ledger.
And the business model for the startups building this is great. They monetize it by charging the enterprise a recurring verified data node fee.
Which the enterprise enthusiastically pays.
Of course, because that subscription fee is a negligible fraction of the millions of dollars in phantom carbon tax penalties they would otherwise incur. It's a no-brainer.
So now that the enterprise has this precise, audit-ready data flowing into their ERP, we have to look at how it actually changes the business beyond just avoiding taxes.
Right. What's the upside? Reclaiming margin, capital allocation.
Exactly. Eliminating a 40% estimation penalty is a massive margin defender. It completely changes the risk profile of the enterprise.
Because when the finance department is staring down impending carbon taxes based on a footprint they know is inflated, they are forced to act defensively, right?
Right. They must hold massive reserves of liquid capital to cover that worst-case compliance scenario. That capital sits stagnant, protecting against phantom risk.
But when you replace the estimate with physical, verified utility data, that phantom liability evaporates.
And the finance department can suddenly release those massive capital reserves. They redirect millions of dollars away from compliance defense and aggressively reinvest it into research and development or expansion or actual decarbonization projects.
Primary data literally frees up operating capital. But how does a company actually act on this newfound truth internally?
Well, this is where the McKinsey report really shines. They explain how best-in-class enterprises are institutionalizing these specific data savings through internal carbon pricing.
Oh, okay. Internal carbon pricing. What does that actually look like in practice?
It's a mechanism where the enterprise assigns a tangible financial cost to Scope 3 emissions during their own internal budgeting and procurement processes.
Got it.
Before this OCR data bridge existed, internal carbon pricing was nearly impossible to implement because the spend-based data was just too inaccurate. You can't base real financial decisions on a 40% error margin.
Right, the data was too squishy.
But with verified primary data flowing into the ERP, you can operationalize it. So let's go back to our procurement officer evaluating two steel suppliers.
Okay, supplier A and supplier B.
Supplier A offers a lower financial price per ton, but the new utility data bridge reveals they operate highly inefficient, coal-powered facilities.
So they're cheap, but dirty.
Right. Supplier B charges a slight market premium, but the primary data proves they utilize clean energy, resulting in a massively reduced carbon footprint.
So under a traditional procurement model, supplier A wins the contract every single time based purely on unit cost.
Exactly. But when the enterprise implements an internal carbon price, let's say they tax internal budgets at $50 per ton of associated Scope 3 emissions, the procurement officer must calculate the total cost of ownership.
So the internal carbon tax penalty added to supplier A's bid suddenly makes them the more expensive option overall.
Yes. Supplier B, despite the higher initial price, becomes the most cost-effective choice when the carbon liability is factored in. McKinsey identifies this as dual mission sourcing.
Dual mission sourcing. I like that. Procurement teams can now compare raw materials accurately, buying products that mathematically minimize both financial costs and regulatory carbon risk simultaneously.
It's transformative. And the impact extends deep into product engineering as well. When R&D teams are given access to granular, activity-based data, they can engage in highly targeted product specification optimization.
Like what? Give me an example.
So the automotive industry relies heavily on a concept called lightweighting. If an engineering team knows the exact, verified carbon footprint embedded in a specific gauge of industrial aluminum, they can run precise calculations.
To see if using less material helps.
Right. They determine if reducing the material thickness by, say, 2 millimeters will yield enough downstream emission savings to justify the retooling cost of the factory.
Or they might rethink the inputs entirely, right? Like replacing heavy metal brackets with bio-based polymers.
Exactly. But these precise engineering pivots are impossible if the underlying data is just a generic economic average. You need the physical truth.
And to ensure these data-driven strategies actually stick, McKinsey talks about organizational alignment.
Right, specifically through the creation of internal capability academies. Because the understanding of Scope 3 mechanics and internal carbon pricing cannot remain isolated within the sustainability department.
It has to be driven into the daily operations of the sales teams, the supply chain managers, the product designers,
Right.
everybody.
But the absolute most critical lever for institutionalizing this truth is executive compensation.
Hitting them in the wallet.
Always works. Progressive enterprises are directly tying executive variable pay, their annual bonuses, to the achievement of specific verified Scope 3 reduction targets.
So when the financial compensation of the C-suite is mathematically linked to the physical reality of the supply chain, you guarantee that the entire organization cares about the data.
Exactly. They prioritize the accuracy of the data bridge over the lazy convenience of the spend-based estimate. The paradigm shift here is profound. By bridging the data gap with physical utility metrics, enterprises are transforming a compliance risk into a competitive advantage.
So what does this all mean for you, the listener? We've covered a lot of ground today. We moved from the high-level guesswork of spend-based accounting.
Which creates that brutal 40% phantom carbon trap.
Right. And we saw how that inflates regulatory liability and paralyzes capital allocation. We looked at the friction of over-engineered IoT hardware networks that inevitably fail on the factory floor.
Silicon Valley hardware trap.
And we landed on the elegant, low-friction solution of using automated OCR pipelines on standard utility bills to pipe primary truth directly into the ERP. It is a masterclass in first principles problem solving.
It really is. It demonstrates that you don't always need to force behavioral change or deploy massive capital to solve a systemic data gap.
Sometimes the biggest, most expensive corporate bottlenecks don't need a complex AI or hardware solution. Sometimes the most powerful intervention is simply building a smarter mechanism to extract the truth that's already sitting there, documented and verified on a PDF.
It challenges the whole assumption that complex global supply chain problems inherently require vastly complex technological interventions.
Which leaves us with one final provocative thought to mull over. If an automated OCR scan of a standard PDF utility bill can eradicate a massive compliance liability and save an enterprise millions of dollars in phantom carbon taxes.
What other massive systemic financial inefficiencies in our global economy are currently hiding behind the excuse of complex algorithms?
What other critical truths are already documented, sitting in an inbox, just waiting for a simple mechanism to bring them to light?
It's definitely something to think about.
It absolutely is. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the source material. Stay insanely curious, and we will catch you next time.